Well, okay. We should be recording.
Yes, it is recording. Do we want to let everyone in now?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay, I'll let them in and I'll watch the lobby while you guys get started.
Okay. Hey y'all, welcome everybody. Still see a couple people trickling in, so I'll wait another few seconds before we get started. Let me share. Thank y'all for being here today. Appreciate it. If y'all have not heard while you are here, this is a webinar for the Build America, Buy America compliance components for the BEAD program. So let me get my slideshow up. Let's see. Always have trouble with Teams. Can y'all see this slide deck?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool. Well, yes, this is going to be our BABA compliance webinar. Just wanted to hit kind of some highlights for you all. I know a lot of people are kind of thinking about getting their bill of materials together, especially as you guys are considering your budgets and making sure you're getting any purchase orders in that you'd like to, and just budgeting with your team. So as y'all are having those conversations and as we are getting closer to subaward execution, wanted to just at a high level go over what BABA is required within BEAD specifically. So a couple things that we want to hit on today are BABA within the BEAD context, because BABA does extend past just the BEAD program. So just want to make sure that everybody's aligned on exactly what the BEAD rules and requirements are. So we'll talk about that first. There's a few categories and buckets that the BABA and the BABA waiver kind of put certain equipment and materials into. So we'll go over what those are. We'll talk about the BABA waiver itself and how to apply it based on the requirements and what's waived and not waived items, what documentation and certifications you guys will need to remain, and what our team will end up reviewing eventually, and then just common compliance challenges. The one thing I wanted to just kind of mention as we get into this one to keep in mind for everybody is that this is just kind of overview. We'll talk some materials, kind of what buckets they fall into, what documentation to require, and all of that. We will have an additional webinar in the future when we actually get to the submission of the documents our team's going to have to look at in order to remain compliant with the BEAD requirements. So we'll have an additional one to be able to walk you guys through how to use the portal for your BABA milestone compliance and how to submit those documents. And then in addition, when we get to our quarterly desk review process, that's going to be the period where we kind of ongoing check for any new materials or equipment that are needing to be purchased so that those can still remain compliant within the BABA rules and regs. So this is more umbrella, big level, but we'll get into the specifics when we get to that point on actual like walkthrough of the portal. And then I didn't say this, but you guys know the chat's open if you have any questions or just stop me at any slide. So just be sure, I'll try and watch that as we go for any questions you guys may have. So just for the basics, what BABA is that it was enacted in 2021 through the IIJA, and its applicability is to iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials outside of BEAD, but we're specifically going to speak to it within the BEAD parameters for your projects. And what it covers is construction, alteration, or repair of broadband infrastructure in this particular regard. So just keeping in mind, of course, all of your projects have to do with building new infrastructure to reach new BSLs that don't currently have service. But there may be a need at some point based on allowability of the exercise and the cost to repair something that may already be built that's needed for to deploy those additional BEAD BSLs. All of those materials used to do any type of repairs also have to be BABA compliant. So just want you guys to be aware of that as well. And then this requirement for BABA does flow down from the federal government to the eligible entity, which is the BEAM office for Mississippi, all the way down to the subrecipient. So I think you guys are aware of that, but just wanted to be extra clear. So if the BEAM office needed to purchase materials or equipment, they would also be held to the BABA rules and regs. So just wanted you guys to be aware of that. So for BABA in the uniform guidance, 2 CFR 184, I think is the reference. Yeah, right there. Kind of breaks everything down into 3 main buckets. And these buckets do come again for the BEAD specific waiver that we'll talk about in a couple slides. For you guys as reference, I am going to drop just the CFR reference in the chat for you guys to have if y'all have never reviewed it before. Again, a waiver does apply, so everything in this particular section will not apply to the BEAD program, but just wanted you guys to have it for reference kind of as I'm talking if you'd like to look at it. So the 3 buckets that the BABA preference puts items into is 1, being iron and steel, 2, construction materials, 3, manufactured products. So for the iron and steel bucket, what that means is that all manufacturing processes, from melting all the way through coating, must occur in the United States. And that applies where an item is more than 50% iron or steel by cost. So that's kind of your test. So if it's an item that's more than 50% iron or steel by cost, then it's going to fall into this iron and steel category bucket. The second bucket are your construction materials. And so what this is for broadband specific projects would be like your glass, optical fiber, and fiber optic cable. We'll get into some more specifics of particular materials and equipment and what buckets they fall into later, but that's just kind of the idea for construction materials. And the BABA requirement for those is that all manufacturing processes for the material must occur in the United States. And then the last bucket is your manufactured products. And a quick test for what would fall into that category is that the cost of the US components must exceed 55% of the total component cost as a collective. And of course, if it does meet that test, must be manufactured in the United States. So that is how original BABA was written. But of course, BEAD is a different beast, and NTIA and Department of Commerce were aware of that. So they decided that they needed to look into getting a waiver. So they did some public outreach, they had some listening sections, some public comment periods, all in order to figure out what is BEAD going to require, what are some industry, like just facts and industry availabilities that are going to affect the BEAD program. So it's quite a long process, but in February of 2024, they released a BEAD BABA general applicability non-availability waiver, which is a mouthful. But if you guys have not seen it, I will actually also drop that into the chat, the signed version. The good thing about this signed version is it does include not just the waiver itself, but it does include kind of some generalized descriptions of the comments that came back that were taken into consideration from Commerce and NTIA. So it kind of helps think through the whole process of like, what was the public saying, what were their decisions, and what is the finality of the actual waiver. So again, it exists to decide, is there anything that we can change between this BABA preference? Because they did see that, some sort of items like semiconductors and electronics are not produced in the US in a sufficiently and reasonably available quantities to meet BEAD's needs. Because of course, y'all know, national project, huge, everybody kind of competing for the same equipment and materials at the same time. So that's the reason for the issuance of the waiver. And it's pretty narrow, unfortunately, but all it does is define categories of equipment while keeping the majority of like the fiber broadband materials made in America. But we'll go over kind of the specifics and where certain equipment may fall. Let's see, I think to the next slide. So on the waiver, there's 3 possible outcomes for any particular equipment or material. So and it's pretty black and white the way that they lay it out. So each item will fall into one of three categories. It's either fully waived, which means that the BABA preference is removed from this category, that it does not have to be BABA compliant due to a variety of reasons listed in the waiver. And so the action for that one is just kind of keeping that classification, that and no documentation from a manufacturer would be needed. And we'll talk about that later based on specific documents needed to sustain whether something is BABA compliant or not. But if it's fully waived, doesn't have to meet those measures. The partially waived bucket is a little confusing. What the waiver for that one states is that the 55% cost of components test that we looked at a few slides ago, that portion is waived, but the specified US manufacturing processes are not. So if you remember a couple slides ago, it said that it would need to exceed 55% for manufactured items of the cost component. That test is waived, but all still need to be manufactured in the US. And there's manufacturer certifications for that. And then the not waived items mean everything still has to abide by the 2 CFR 184 reference. Nothing for BABA would be waived for these particular items. So that means all rules regs would still apply. Certifications need to be obtained, and all other supporting documentation that we'll get into. Want to pause real quick if there's any questions around the three buckets or the three possible outcomes for the BABA waiver of where something may fall. And we'll get into what some of those specific equipment items may be that would fall into each of these in just a little bit. Okay. If y'all do have questions, just drop them in the chat, but I'm gonna keep going. So this is, at a glance, some of the equipment that is fully waived, partially waived, and not waived. The things that are fully waived in the waiver, if you go to the bottom, let me look at what page it is if you guys want to look along with me, starts at page, let's see, page 13 of the waiver, under section 3 where it states waiver. It has scope of waiver, and that's where all of these items will be kind of the buckets they'll fall into if you or your team want to reference back to the waiver itself as we continue. But the fully waived items do not have to be BABA compliant, are your router, switches, radio antennas, power systems or amplifiers, passive optical equipment, combined ONT, router gateway devices, or non-optic class inputs to preforms. Those are things that NTIA and Commerce decided, weren't readily available, didn't seem to meet anything that could be in a way that could meet the BABA requirements. So those are fully waived. The partially waived, meaning that 55% component test is waived, but all processes still have to be manufactured in the US is still required. Those are your OLTs, RLTs, OLT line cards, subscriber-facing optic pluggables, standalone ONTs, and ONUs. I apologize, I do not know all of this jargon, but those are the items in the waiver that I transposed over. And then the things that are not waived, unfortunately, and I know are causing some headache for you guys, are the fiber optic cable, optical fiber, optic glass, cabinet spots, pedestals, closures, and terminals, conduit, patch panels, mounting brackets, iron and steel products, including radio towers, which isn't applicable to the Mississippi projects, but that is just at a glance, the equipment and materials that kind of fall into each bucket. And again, the waiver itself that I sent in the chat kind of lines all of this out and as to why the decision was made. So please have your team kind of reference that because it can get a little squirrely, at least in my read of it. So this is as clear as I can make it as a glance, but the waiver, of course, is going to be your source of truth. Any questions around any of these items? Okay. So again, we're going to have some additional webinars in the future regarding the specifics around how we'll obtain certain documentation from you guys. First, for the BABA compliance milestone in order to get your reimbursement for that one. And then as the project continues through construction, during your quarterly desk reviews, any additional equipment needing to be purchased will be reviewed then for our BABA review. So just quickly, kind of to give an idea, this is not comprehensive and not finalized, but just in general, what we're thinking for fully waived, impartially and not, for all items, we're going to have a bill of materials from you guys. So we're just going to need to have that on file, and we'll have to kind of categorize it out between the 3 buckets so we know what level of review is necessary. For fully waived, we need the category, the material, the item number, spec sheet, whatever it may be, and just kind of a justification or notes as to why it would be fully waived under the waiver, a reference to the section or something like that. We'll figure that out with you guys when we get to the actual documentation portion of that. The partially waived section, just because it just waives the 55% component part, but not the manufacturing processes. You will need a product-specific manufacturer documentation obtained, and we can talk about ways to obtain those too. Just making sure that that is saved down and or submitted to the BEAM office for our review. And then not waived, that'll be a little bit more intensive, if not using some of the self-certification lists available, which I'll speak to in the next slide. But everything, of course, for non-waived is just like full-fledged documentation needed to make sure that everything is BABA compliant. So that's just at a high level kind of what we're thinking. Of course, fully waived being the least concerning, given that BABA is not applicable there. But how compliance gets proven, if you guys have not been made aware yet, NTIA and Department of Commerce have worked together to create a BEAD BABA self-certification list. And what that is that manufacturers, kind of at their own penalty, are allowed to go to them and say, hey, I want to register us as a manufacturer and these particular products as BABA compliant for the BEAD program. And they have a comprehensive list on a website. I can find that too when we get to the question section and send it over to you guys, to be able to state, we're telling you and the ISPs and the states that these particular materials are BABA compliant. So if you purchase off of that list and something happens to not be BABA compliant, that is on the manufacturer, not on you guys. So that is the safest way to obtain materials. The certification page or the self-certification list that they have is a little maybe hard to navigate. So our team has worked to kind of even further detail that list into specific items and equipment. So we'll work to get that list out to you guys as well, to be a little bit more in the weeds of each individual component for what we could find given the available information online. So we can get you that resource as well. So that's one way to remain compliant. It's the easiest, least confusing on you guys and us, just using that self-certification list. But there are certain ones that would not be on the self-certification list, but these manufacturers know that the BEAD program is coming and that certain things have to be BABA compliant. So if you could just request from them a certification letter that something is BABA compliant, even if they're not on the list, that's another type of documentation that you can obtain. And all of these manufacturers are prepared for these requests because they know BEAD has been coming for so long. So this is not news to them. They'll know what you're needing if you ask. And if there's anybody who's confused or it needs additional information of what's required, we can always work to see what we can get them or get on a call to kind of explain the rules and requirements if they are not aware. And then, of course,
Lindsay, I dropped that self-certification list in the chat.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Angel.
You bet.
And then, of course, just report to us when we have that process ready, and maintain those records for all materials and equipment purchased. So that is how you can remain compliant. There are some, if you run into an unknown equipment that you're not sure which category it would fall into, or if it's BABA compliant or not, and the manufacturer can't really help you, there's a few things you can do here, just kind of step by step, and we can always work with you too in the manufacturer to try and figure out the best path forward if it's an item that you kind of have to have for your project. The first thing would be just to request the cut sheet to actually see what the item truly does. or determine its primary function to be able to put it into one of those categories. And then, of course, match it to a category of electronics, passive optical, what have you, to see if it's waived fully or partial. If you don't know, but hopefully that won't be too much of an issue. Just wanted to briefly touch on it. So as we move into subawards and thinking about what to do next regarding BABA, get your BOM together, make sure that that is pretty comprehensive, especially for your milestone BABA compliance, making sure that that's as comprehensive as it can be, although we understand that certain things may have to be purchased throughout the period of performance once we get to construction. That may just have come up that you may not have contemplated. We do understand that. That's what the quarterly desk reviews are for, but as fully fleshed out as your BOM can be on the front end, that'll be helpful. So just clarify or classify every product into a BABA category that we talked about, the fully waived, partially, or not waived. Use that self-certification list, and then collect any certification letters that you may need if they aren't already on that list. Retain those records in your files, and we'll retain them in ours as well once we obtain them from you. Of course, that's the report compliance to the state broadband office. And then who knows if this could change. I know lots of requests have been added to NTIA to maybe update the waiver. So we will be rechecking the waiver on a regular basis and communicating any additional waived items or categories to you all as that becomes available. But that's just kind of the last thing, but we'll kind of do that with you guys to make sure that nothing additional has happened or changed. So I know it's very high level. The waiver itself is very detailed, very helpful if you or your team want to give that a review and a read. Again, all of the manufacturers in the country are aware of this, at least for the most part, I believe. There's plenty on that self-certification list, and we'll get that additional tool that our team's kind of been working on to you guys in a fashion here soon. So this should not be shocking news to any of the manufacturers. There should be plenty of ways to remain compliant with these. I do know there are some concerns around particular equipment and materials. And at this time, NTIA has not requested or granted any type of a waiver for fiber at the moment. So if there's anything that the state can do, we will, I know the BEAM office will work with NTIA to get any questions answered, but at this time they have not granted anything additional. So that is all I had for the presentation, kind of short and sweet today, but wanted to see if you guys have any questions at the moment. If you guys have reviewed the waiver before, have any more specific questions about that document itself. Yeah, Mike, I see your hand raised.
Thanks, Lindsay. So we've worked with our suppliers, we worked with our manufacturers, and we still have a list of parts that are non-compliant. For instance, galvanized parts, aerial hardware that just simply is not made in America. It doesn't stop there, but that's one example.
Sure.
If we've exhausted all of our attempts at sourcing these materials, what are we left with?
That's a good question. Given NTIA's lack to grant any additional waiver, I think at the moment a waiver request potentially could be an option. If they can, I think what we've heard that they would need to see that they have not quite seen yet is like true hard and fast data or evidence that truly there is none. And if that is the case, I feel like a case could be made for a potential waiver. But if there's anything that you have, anything you've looked into that you would feel comfortable sharing with the BEAM office and want to put that into an email to have a waiver considered possibly based on what's available, that's something we can discuss with you. But at this time, if NTIA hasn't waived it, we're kind of stuck until maybe they grant something, unfortunately.
And I just dropped the bead line email address in the chat. And Kalskine, thank you for helping me with the link. It looks like I copied the hyperlink twice, so it did not work.
All good.
For all of those type situations, Mike, or anything else that you guys have questions, please send an email to msbead@beam.ms.gov, and we'll be happy to either contact our federal program officer or do what we can do to try to get an answer.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
I guess that's clear as mud to everybody.
To say, Lindsay, I think you did such a good job that nobody has any questions.
Well, I'm gonna give
Before we
go ahead.
dismiss Kyle Brown, you want to start call and roll?
No, I don't think so. But Lindsay, I remember what you and I talked about earlier. If
Yeah.
you'd like to touch on that now.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, if you guys have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat real quick. But just a couple general updates for everybody to be reminded of. If I know everybody at this point has had a conversation with the BEAM office and myself and some members of my team regarding the version 9 fabric updates that came out and what potential adjustments they may have to some of your projects. So if you have had those conversations with us and, there's been a few that require more significant adjustment, unfortunately, based on what the FCC is saying, and we have kind of advised you to pause on project plan, you know who you are and what those projects are. So keep pausing on project plan. But if we have had, conversations where the adjustments are minimal or have released you to continue to work on project plan without having to have NIST or NTIA approval of some sort of a rescope, which is majority of the projects are released. So please continue to be in the ready.net BEAM MS portal. We don't have any submitted at the time being as of this afternoon, but I do know there's a few that are available to be submitted and completed. And the sooner we can get those done, of course, the better. Can move towards sub-grant agreement execution much faster whenever those are completed. So if you have any questions or anything about completing those, please let me know. But please do be in there working on them, trying to get those ones that are kind of freed up to continue on working as quickly as possible would put you guys in the state kind of in the best position possible.
And if you have any questions on whether or not you need to stay paused or are okay to proceed, again, send us an email to MS BEAD. We'll be happy to send you a quick response to let you know you have the green light or let's hold.
Right. So yeah, that was the only other thing. I know everybody is eager to get to sub-grant execution. So for what we can continue to move on where we're addressing some of these other issues, would love to see some of that progress happen. Okay. Well, seeing no other questions, I think Angel, KB, that is all I had. Thank y'all for listening to me ramble. I apologize if it was at all confusing, but we do have those resources in the chat for you guys to review. And if an NTIA puts out anything additional that would be helpful for you guys, we will forward that along as well, and then work on getting y'all that additional tool that our team has come up with for that self-certification list to help maybe more easily navigate what those options are for y'all.
Thank you, everybody, for your time. If you have any questions, definitely shoot us an email, and we will see all of you next time on our next BEAD Office Hours.
So thanks, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.